President Bola Tinubu says he has accepted Professor Mahmood Yakubu's departure as chairman of the Independent National Electoral Commission following the expiration of his second term in office. In a statement by the special advisor to the president on information and strategy, Bayo Onanuga, President Tinubu thanked Professor Yakubu for his services to the nation and his effort to sustain Nigeria's democracy, particularly through the organization of free and fair elections throughout his two-term tenure. In recognition of his dedicated service to the nation, President Tinubu has bestowed on him the honor of the Commander of the Order of the Niger, CON.
Well, for more on this, let's bring in Oluwole Osaze-Uzzi, who is a former Director of Voter Education and Publicity at the Independent National Electoral Commission. Good morning, sir. Welcome to the program today.
Good morning, and thank you for having me on.
You're welcome. It's a pleasure. This momentous time in history, if I may call it that. Before you came on, we had a bit of a debate about the legacy of Professor Mahmood Yakubu. How would you summarize the decade that he has overseen our electoral affairs?
Thank you again. Yes, a decade. We've never had a chairman who served for up to a decade. The highest any chairman has ever served is 5 years, and I think very few chairmen have actually completed their tenure of 5 years. Since INEC was established, Justice Apata, the pioneer chairman, died in office. Dr. Ebe Ogobadia served his term of 5 years. Then Professor Ewu came, was supposed to serve 5 years, but was sent on leave, terminal leave, a few months to the end of his own tenure. And then came, after him, Professor Jega served his 5-year tenure. But nobody had ever done 10 years, 2 tenures. So it's historic in that sense. We've known no other chairman, no other chief electoral commissioner for the Federal Republic except Professor Mahmood Yakubu in the last 10 years. A lot has happened in 10 years. The jury is out about his tenure, but I think in deciding his legacy, you have to look at several factors. You have to look at the internal, you have to look at the administrative, you have to look at the operational. So when we break down these different sectors, then there will be a proper holistic assessment of his tenure. It's an office that somebody once described as a graveyard of reputations. A lot of people went there with high credentials, high reputations, integrity intact. But by the time they left office, most of them left with their hinds between their legs, with bad, not so good reputations as they came into office. As I said, the history will judge Professor Yakubu's tenure. That said, there are quite a few things that innovations that came in, and it consolidated on the work that Professor Jega had done in the past. So yes, in that regard. But whether we are better off in terms of electoral consolidation 10 years from when he first took over, that's a different question to be answered.
Okay. Obviously, there's been lots of Chinese whispers on the tenure, the account of stewardship of the immediate past national chairman of INEC. I wouldn't want to really take you back to say, how would you assess his tenure? But I would rather want to ask, what are the lessons that we can learn from that tenure? Where did we get it wrong and where did we get it right? Because some people have been saying, it's been most controversial, but we want to really see how we can move forward from this, where the pitfalls, where were the landmines and that we need to triumph, and also in the area of the Electoral Act and the necessary reforms that we need to get right ahead of the 2027 elections.
Well, the very fact, let me start from where you landed. The very fact that we have to start talking of electoral reforms, the amendment to the Electoral Framework, the Electoral Act, obviously says that all is not well with our electoral process. So that it still needs some fine-tuning or probably a complete upheaval and a new legal framework. That said, where do we restart the assessment? There's a lot. What are the positives? Let's deal with the positives. I think that during the last 10 years, we've seen the improvements. Don't forget that 10 years ago, we had card reader. First of all, we had the PVC, permanent voters card. Then we had the card reader. These were the foundations, the building blocks upon which Professor Yakubu's tenure consolidated. After the, in place of the smart card reader, we now had the BVAS, the bimodal voter authentication system. That's a marked improvement. It not only authenticated the voter, it could, it had potential to also transmit results. So that was a fundamental thing. Then you had other technological innovations. You had the IRev. This is the result viewing portal. Prior to now, we pasted results on in the polling units, and very often they tore those results and everything else, and people outside of that vicinity could not see the results. So with the IRev, the result viewing portal, anybody from anywhere in the world with internet connectivity could see the results as they were uploaded from the field. So you could look at your polling unit and say, hey, that's the correct result, or that's not the correct result, they changed this or they changed that. So anybody from anywhere, somebody from New York can sit down and say, okay, what happened in my village? What happened in my polling unit? This is the results we got from our polling unit. Fantastic. So that is a marked improvement in terms of that. Then that transmission of results from the polling unit as enshrined in the Electoral Act was also a very good thing. But then came the interpretations of the use of these devices. And unfortunately, the courts interpreted that these devices were supplementary. They were not mandatory under the existing legal framework. And INEC went to court to argue this. Prior to then, the innovation was introduced by INEC, not by any other person, not organization or entity. INEC introduced it.
And I'm glad you make this point, if I may just jump in, because of course a lot of names, naturally as they would be, are being thrown around with regards to who could be next to pick up the baton stick. Yes. And that name of Professor Amupitan has dominated headlines for a couple of weeks now. And for me, what captured my attention when we dissected the headlines here was the fact that, well, he specializes in the law of evidence. So do you think that this is something that can add value? Is this the direction we're going in now? Or do you think that we need to be looking at people whose strengths just focus on the credibility? Is there some specialist expertise that now needs to be embodied in an INEC chairman, in your opinion?
Well, I think there has always been, notwithstanding the fact that the Constitution does not spell out specific expertise. It just says you should be a man of proven integrity, has the age limit, and not belong to a political party. That's about it. But I think to be INEC chairman, there's certain qualities that we should look for. We're not involved in the appointing system. It's up to the President, the Council of States, who are consulted, and the Senate, which confirms. But there has to be some level of sagacity amongst anybody you're thinking of. There has to be some energy, some perception, and some intelligence, because it's a very, very demanding job, and you have to be physically, mentally very, very fit to hold that position. Your field of expertise may or may not bear. Professor Yakubu is a professor of history, an extremely intelligent, perceptive person, and very, very good at that. But evidence, I hold the view that our evidential system in terms of electoral jurisprudence has to be looked at very, very critically. The onus of proof, for example, that the election was conducted in line with the Constitution and the Electoral Act and INEC guidelines, should not rest with the petitioner. It should go to the Commission, which has been saddled with that responsibility. Professor Mukhtar will understand that. But I don't want to dwell on speculation. I've heard different things about the people being considered. Yes, one person may have dominated, but that may not be the person that is appointed. So maybe we wait for that appointment to come to really, really dissect that. But yes, you don't need to be a lawyer. You don't need to be only one or two justices or judges have occupied that position. Justice Osaze-Uzzi was FEDECO chairman, and Justice Akpata, retired as Supreme Court Justice, was the pioneer chairman of INEC. We've had professors, Professor of Pharmacognosy and Professor Wu. We've had Professor Jega, Social Sciences and Political Science. We've had now Professor Yakubu. So how well we have done, I'm not so sure that it depends solely on the chairman of the commission. There's a systemic issue that also has to be addressed. But the chairman, the buck stops with the chairman. The chairman has to be a strong person. Strong not just mentally, but strong intellectually. That's so important. He must be strong administratively and must be able to withstand. Integrity is probably the most important thing that you look out for, not necessarily the discipline of the appointee.
Okay. You've said you've talked about the role of the INEC chairman being a graveyard of integrity. Interestingly, you also worked closely with Professor Mahmoud Yakubu across his tenure, a substantial part of his tenure, and when you talk about that role being a graveyard of integrity, it draws some deep concerns within Nigerians that want to see Nigeria have a credible leadership. And that talks about the defects that have been campaigned against in the Constitution. For instance, while Section 153 establishes the independence of INEC, Section 154 provides that the President could appoint the INEC chairman after consultation with the Council of State. That word consultation weakens the functional value of any checks within the process. And most importantly, one thing that was also fundamental in Professor Mahmoud Yakubu's tenure was that it ushered in a floodgate of a very disturbing dichotomy. That's the courts elected appointees and the ballot box elected political appointees. So the question is, how do we preserve the sanctity of the ballot? We don't want the judicial pronouncement to end a transition process. It's very disturbing. So how would you react to this?
It is very disturbing indeed. And I recall after one of the electoral cycles, so after one of the general elections, one of the CSOs came out with a publication, I think it was called Democracy by Court Order. It just showed the pervasive nature of the courts.
You agree that was quite an aberration?
Yes, it is an aberration of sorts, but let me contextualize it. In every human endeavor, there's likely to be disputes when two or more people come together. Now, the Constitution recognizes that there will be disputation, or there's likely to be disputation in any election. So there's a dispute resolution mechanism put in place by the Constitution, which is a way of dealing with issues in a civilized society. And that is why election petition by the courts come in there. But the courts' interjection and interventions have been pervasive throughout, both in the pre-election and the election, post-election cycles. It's been there. So you have hundreds, literally hundreds and thousands of cases going on to a court system, pre-election cases going on to Supreme Court. I recall that after the 2023, it was just before and just after the 2023 elections, you go to the Supreme Court and you have 25, 30 cases on the list. And because they are time-bound, the courts are bound to give these cases preference. Everything else, for months on end, everything else suffered. No Supreme Court should be faced with 25 cases on its roll, on its court list, on its docket, each day. It's ridiculous. It cannot even do justice to it. And many of these issues were recondite, were things like that. Did you take part in an election? Was there internal party democracy and things like that? So it was mundane in that sense. It's wrong. It shouldn't be so. But that is where we are. We are very litigious. I don't think any other country has the kind of electoral jurisprudence that Nigeria does. But then again, having said that, what do you do where there are disputes? What do? You have to resort to the courts. And that is where it comes in. But the role of the courts, ironically, the courts say that, look, we should not be involved in political issues. We're only concerned with whether these parties and candidates have followed guidelines and the law. But invariably, thousands of cases go to court. It is, as you said, in that context, it's an aberration that so much will be determined. And we have, in this country, there are those who they call Supreme Court governors. And these are people who the voters feel we did not vote for this one. Democracy should be voting through the ballot box, not through judicial pronouncement and orders. So people find it difficult to say a person who came third or fourth in an election is returned as governor, but did not win the popular vote. That is it's a thing that probably has to be addressed. We have to carry out more in-depth conversations on that, and from that will stem a pathway to such that the judiciary will not have as much. Right. They're not elected. They do not have as much say in who gets elected. Absolutely. That should remain with the people.
Absolutely. Now, if I may just come in here, two points very quickly. The first being the 2023 election, which many people say was the definitive election that will shape whatever history will define Professor Mahmoud Yakubu's legacy as being, do you think the 2023 election will be a positive mark on his reputation or a stain? That's number one. Then number two, some people will say that, well, the longer you stay, the more opportunity you have to potentially, damage a good thing you would have been building. Do you think that we should stick to a single tenure for an INEC chairman, or do you think the longevity has some benefits?
Your last question is like a coin. A coin has two sides. Do one term, do your bit, and go away. But yes, you can also correct whatever mistakes. Experience is the best teacher, they say. So yes, you may have made mistakes. I'm sure Professor Mahmoud said, look, in 2019, I did certain things. There are certain things I could have done differently. Benefit of hindsight. Hindsight, they say, has 20/20 vision. So you say, maybe there are things we can correct. I now know better. I'm more experienced. So you are given a second tenure. One good turn deserves another. So you are given a second tenure to correct whatever shortcomings, consolidate on the shortcomings of the previous one, and then do better. Whether 2023 was better than 2019, let each individual decide that. It's a watershed, but I will go back in tracing the legacy of Mahmoud. I will go back to, for example, to 2020 and the Edo governorship election. That was the first time the IRev was tested. Certain things were tested for the first time, and they seemed to work very, very well. That built confidence. At the time, confidence was low. It built the confidence. People say, yes, this thing can be done. I can go there, cast my vote, go home, or on my smartphone, check my result to ensure that what we voted for, the results that came in from my polling unit, was what was reflected. And that's what INEC will use in collation. So Edo 2020 was a pointer. And confidence was built. A lot of young people that had never registered went on to register, and expectations were high. Then everything happened. The glitch happened.
Now, let me just quickly ask this, because when you look at the weight of the level of election petition, most of what we have were pre-election matters. So, and that borders on the strength of our internal democracy. When you look at the Constitution, the INEC seems to have a very light, passive role in monitoring election primaries. How can we get it right in party democracy and in our internal democracy practice?
I think there are two, I don't know how to use conflicting schools of thought on this, but there are two issues that are almost parallel that you have to consider. One, a political party is supposed to be an association of people of like minds. The Supreme Court, I think, says it's like a club, an association. You voluntarily join a political party. So, but at the same time, you agree to be bound by the rules of political parties. So there's a limit to which law should intervene in the internal workings of political parties. In selection of candidates, for example, the political party, they might choose, you are the most popular person within the party, but we don't think you can win an election because you have electoral baggage, your credentials are faulty, and we don't want to lose the election because of certain things. The minister has just resigned on allegations, I say, of certificate forgery. He may have contested an election, for example, and the party will say, there's the issues with your certificates, and yes, you're popular, yes, you're likely to win the election for us, but we don't want to lose that election. We've had occasions in this country where somebody won an election, we're rehearsing for a handover, and less than 24 hours it was removed because of certificate issues by his deputy. So the party might say,
unfortunately,
yes.
Excuse me. Oh, goodness me. Sorry. So sorry. Unfortunately, our time is up. I know we could listen to you for so long. You're such a wealth of knowledge and wisdom and experience in this sector. However, our time is fast spent. Absolutely. But we're going to keep our eyes on that council of elders meeting that's going to take place tomorrow, of state meeting, that'll take place tomorrow, and see if anything emerges from that. We thank you so much for your time today, and that's all we have time for here on Daybreak today. I'm Vimbai Mutinide Ekweyong, signing out from Lagos.
And I'm Benga Ashiru. Goodbye from me.